Awesome. And now I'll hand the meeting over to Chair Boatright.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am calling this public hearing to order at 4:35 p.m. in accordance with the Building Emissions Reduction and Disclosure Ordinance regulations adopted pursuant to the Building Emissions Reduction and Disclosure Ordinance, Boston City Code, Ordinances Section 7-2.2. The BERDO Review Board will hold a virtual public hearing at 4:30 p.m. on June 30th to review the following topics in regards to the reduction of greenhouse gases from building energy production and consumption so as to promote the public health and welfare of Boston residents. One more paragraph to read. In accordance with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Executive Order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, we are conducting this public meeting online. To ensure public access to the deliberations of the BERDO Review Board, the public may access this call through telephone and video conferencing. Members of the public will have an opportunity to provide public comment during the public hearing section of the meeting today. To do so, please raise your hand or type in the chat in the application via the Zoom meeting platform. If you're calling and cannot use the platform, you can raise your hand by pressing *9 or send your questions via email to staff at berdoreviewboard@boston.gov. For the record, I'm Jessica Boatright, chair of the board, and I will now conduct a roll call of board members. Board members, please say your name in accordance to how they appear on the slide. Jessica Boatright.
Stephen Ellis.
Hassan Faruqi.
Lori Ferris.
Gail Lattimore.
Reginald Stovall.
Great, and staff will now introduce themselves.
I don't believe Commissioner Sellers Garcia is here yet, but Diana Vasquez, BERDO Review Board Manager.
Hi, everyone. Claudia Diaz Martinez, Environment Department.
Ziggy Chen, BERDO Review Board Assistant.
Great. So I think here's the, you already advanced the slide. So here's the agenda for today's meeting. I did just want to acknowledge we have a really nice turnout from the public today listening in on the meeting. So thank you all for taking us a beautiful summer evening to join us. The agenda for tonight, we are going to start with an overview of district energy systems from Steve Winter Associates. Then staff will report updates on the BERDO regulations. Afterwards, we'll approve the meeting minutes for May 27th and hear administrative updates. And then finally, we will adjourn the meeting. So moving into our first agenda item, I'm going to hand it over to Steve Winter Associates in just a minute to provide an overview of district energy systems. I did just want to preface this by saying that Steve Winter Associates is a technical consulting team for the BERDO board, and we requested this presentation after a few discussions about district energy systems, just because there are a few new members of the board, myself included, and we thought it would be helpful to get an overview of sort of how they work and how they serve the city. And this is meant as an informational topic today. So I just wanted to set that stage. We're not taking action. It's just a learning session for the board. So with that, I will hand it over to Steve Winter and Associates.
Great, thanks. My name's Adam Shalhetka from Stephen Winter Associates, and I'm here with my colleague Jason Baccio to help out with any questions that may arise. But yeah, as described, going to give an overview of district energy systems, what they are, how they operate, and the local context in Boston. So we can go to the next slide, please. So here we are. Great, so here's our agenda. As I said, district energy networks, the concept behind them, what they mean, different configurations, how you see them appear in the US, the types of generated energy. So what type of energy these systems produce and how they make it. Third, we'll talk about the use of district energy. So what are buildings actually doing with this energy once it arrives in the building? How is it used? Fourth, talk about locally the vicinity and the main networks, about how they're configured, who they serve, their scale, and again, with the role they play in Boston. Fifth, we'll talk about decarbonization efforts. So like any process using to heat and cool and power a building, there's energy and carbon associated with that. So what locally, what's taking place and around the country, what are some examples to again reduce the GHG intensity and emissions from these types of networks? And then six, a brief note on just BERDO and GHG emission factors and how district energy and district steam in particular plays into those. So next slide, please. So first, we'll start with district energy networks and their definition. Next slide, please. Great. So again, at its simplest, it's a central plant generates either hot water, steam, chilled water, electricity. We'll get into all those, but somewhere there's a power plant or a plant generating this type of mediums to serve buildings. It's distributed through a piping network. So from that plant, pipes go to buildings connected directly to them to serve them. And multiple buildings are served by these systems. So the point here is that these are pretty large scale. So instead of a building having its own power generation, whether it's a boiler, hot water heater, what have you, again, you have the central plant serving these buildings in a large network of them. Where do we see them? Usually in dense urban areas throughout the Northeast, actually throughout the country, as we'll see. But when you have a lot of buildings close together, there's reasons, economies of scale to develop these systems and have the buildings connect to them. Often see them at university and college campuses, a lot of structures built at the same time, master planned. You can build a power plant to serve the buildings all at once and, keep everything as part of the campus. Similarly, hospital and research campuses, a lot of similar needs and energy demands. They can, maintain some control over their power generation and energy within buildings, and then military bases and airports. So wherever we have a lot of often buildings that are working together for some reason as in a campus or densely concentrated in an urban area, you'll see district energy systems. And they can be owned in different ways. So we have privately operated systems as we have in Boston. A private entity owns and operates the system, providing the services to its buildings. You can have publicly regulated utilities. So in New York City, Con Edison has the utility has a district steam network serving buildings throughout Manhattan, but the local utility is the one who runs that network. And then you can have publicly owned. So examples of Washington, D.C. and federal government buildings, they have their own systems. They all operate in the same way, just different considerations depending on who owns and operates it. Next slide, please. So, why do we have these systems, or why were they developed? In theory, in principle, these are the key concepts. So you have efficiency. We'll get into this, but these systems can generate more than one type of energy at once. And so you have economies of scale. As I said, you can generate a lot of energy. It can be distributed. You can reuse some waste energy off those systems to create other types of energy. So there's benefits there. Reduced peak demand. So what we're saying here is that these plants have the ability to shift loads and take advantage of storage. And if there's high strains on the grid, they're centrally controlling the distribution of energy to a lot of buildings. They can distribute it in a little more of an organized manner to help meet some demands on the grid. For building owners, fundamentally, you have a reduced equipment costs and space. When buildings were built, they tap into a district energy system. They don't need boilers. They don't need mechanical equipment in the basement, depending on what they receive. They don't need the space to hold that stuff. You have pipes bringing in the energy to your building. You pay for it, but the maintenance, upkeep of all that equipment it's not your problem. The district energy system is providing that to you. You just receive the energy. System reliability. So this is industrial scale equipment, operating 24/7, teams of engineers on site, keeping these systems running. So again, if you're a building, you don't have the concern of your boiling plant or hot water heaters going down. Again, that's managed off site. You just receive the energy. And then there's some fuel flexibility. So again, as we'll get into, these systems can generate energy in many ways, do combinations of energy generation. And they're traditionally bringing in more types of not just traditional fuels, gas, oil, renewable electricity, but also you will see there's organic matter, byproducts from other processes that can use to generate energy in a large scale. So there's some flexibility there. And these date back to the 19th century, again, starting particularly with deep dense urban areas and university systems. power plants were built, and they sort of started seeing this concept of sharing the energy resources across a lot of buildings. Next slide, please. So these are quite widespread. There's over 660 systems in all 50 states. As noted, they primarily serve commercial and institutional buildings. There are large-scale bigger multifamily buildings that will apartment buildings that will tap into district energy, as do like your traditional office building. But primarily, they serve commercial institutional buildings. Billions of square feet in heating and cooling. Globally, it accounts for about 9% of heating needs in buildings and industry, and most colleges and universities have them. Again, based on the nature of the ownership, you'll see them. It's very common throughout the country in universities and colleges. Next slide, please. So next we'll talk about the types of energy that's generated. It runs a spectrum. We'll talk about what's generated, then we'll get into how buildings use it. So next slide, please. So first, there's electricity. These plants can generate electricity. That can come from various sources, whether it's fossil fuels, geothermal systems, but traditionally they're used to make steam. That steam generates turbines that connect to a generator, and then you generate electricity. So these plants can ultimately use fossil fuels, maybe some other sources, to generate electricity for the buildings they serve. And about 75%, as you see, use natural gas. Electricity can also come from renewable energy in some cases. So when there is access to hydroelectric or larger wind turbines, that can be used to spin the generators to make electricity as opposed to fossil fuels. But at the end of the day, something needs to be powering the equipment to make electricity to then send to the buildings that the plant's connected to. Next slide. Most common we're going to see is steam and hot water. So again, fossil fuels, whether it's natural gas, maybe in some cases oil or coal. Large power plants will make steam, will make hot water used to heat and serve buildings. Again, as opposed to, keep in mind, like having a boiler plant in your building that does it in your building, these central plants, on a much larger scale, will generate these mediums and send them directly to buildings. Steam and hot water can also be a byproduct of electric production. That can be called combined heat and power, or CHP. You'll see this term a lot. But in the process of making electricity, there's a lot of waste heat and a lot of energy that comes out of that process that can be harnessed to then heat up water to use for steam or hot water to also go to buildings that would otherwise be wasted when these plants are generating electricity anyway. And then, CHP, combined heat and power, is in about 43% of all district energy systems. So it's an economic consideration as much as anything. Again, it's a smart use of heat that would be wasted otherwise. You might as well use it for something productive and sell it. Next slide, please. They can also generate chilled water central systems. So this is chilled water used to directly cool buildings, to go in big, large central air conditioning systems in the summer. This can happen a few ways. Absorption chillers, the type of machinery that can do this, can take waste heat or primarily generated heat and generate chilled water that's sent to buildings to cool them off. And then there also can be centrifugal chillers that just use electricity directly to produce chilled water. So again, waste heat or just use electricity. And there are cases where waste heat in these plants can be used for electric production and both hot water and chilled water. So then we have trigeneration as opposed to cogeneration. So again, some of these plants will make all three from their original process when they're creating electricity. Next slide. So from there, electricity, heating, whether it's hot water or steam, or chilled water to cool a building, what happens once it leaves the plant, goes through the pipes, goes through its network to the buildings that it serves. So next slide, please. So we'll just break this down. First, in the situation where district steam or steam is coming from the central plant, that steam can just be directly used for heating in the building. The picture in the top right is what it looks like. There is a pipe coming into the basement. That pipe, maybe they will reduce the pressure of the steam, but then it'll be split off into smaller pipes and serve the building, go directly to radiators, go to heating coils and air handling units, what have you. But again, steam is coming directly into the building by a pipe. The building owner pays for it. And that replaces having a boiler in the basement that's generating that steam. They just directly take it and use it in the building for their heating needs. That same steam comes in on a pipe can also be used for hot water loops. So instead of steam traveling the pipes to the building, you have a process where there's a heat exchanger that does just what it sounds like. Steam heats up water. That water is what's circulated throughout the building to serve baseboard units or hot water coils, whatever system is pulling heat off of that hot water loop to heat the building. So the only difference is steam comes in, they just heat up water using that steam and pump it around the building as opposed to sending steam directly through the pipes inside. Next slide, please. Just like heat, it can be used for domestic hot water or service hot water. The domestic hot water, we're talking about showers, cooking, sinks, service hot water for more industrial processes or laundry or other industrial needs where you need hot water. Instead of heating up a water loop to heat a building, you're heating up a water loop to provide potable or hot water that you need to use. And don't need to get into the weeds, but of course, there's loops and there's transfers. The potable water is not coming into direct contact with the steam, just in heat exchangers. They're heating up the water that way rather than using a boiler or something else. And then there's also district hot water. So again, just breaking these down, but it's all sort of different versions of the same thing. Instead of steam coming in, heated hot water, we'll call it district hot water, is coming into the building and again, circulated throughout the building. Take out the steam part, you just heated, comes in and serviced by the building. And yeah, I'm sorry if I don't mean to mix match any words. I see that comment. I'm speaking exclusively about the district energy system. So whether it's a private district system or utility, whichever plant is generating these mediums, this is what's coming into the building. Next slide, please. Steam or hot water can be used for cooling. This gets a little technical. We're talking about chillers earlier, but the point is different equipment can take heated mediums like steam and hot water. An absorption chiller can turn that into chilled water or condenser water to circulate through a building for air conditioning. So again, you're taking heated mediums from the plant, it comes into your building, you have equipment that can use it for cooling. It kicks the heat out, and then you use it for central air conditioning. And then district chilled water, instead of having that equipment that needs to conduct that process, district chilled water, already cold, is coming directly into the building for air conditioning. And then it's circulated through pumps, but again, directly serving the building. Next slide, please. And this gets a little in the weeds, but just so I want everyone to be aware of this terminology, district energy systems have been referred to as they increase in complexity from first, second, third, fourth. There's a lot of discussion right now about something called fourth generation and fifth generation systems. Again, the purpose of the idea behind these systems is that as technology gets more sophisticated, as the ways in which we can transfer energy between buildings gets more sophisticated, it can become just that much more efficient. And so again, this is a much larger discussion, but when you hear something about fourth generation systems, what we're getting into now and looking towards in the future, using things like heat pump technology, which is much more efficient than giant boilers or something using energy to heat up water, storing energy to distribute it at a later time, reusing waste heat. And overall, this idea is that these systems can take advantage of lower temperature steam and hot water they need to distribute to buildings. That takes technology to do that, but that lower temperature takes less energy to make in the first place. And so just a combination of different technologies allow you to use less energy overall. Fifth generation gets even more complex, where it talks about where buildings, not only between the plant and the buildings can be transferring both heating and cooling at the same time to distribute. Quite complex, but using it even less energy is that waste energy otherwise being used in some buildings could be transferred amongst buildings from the plant. Again, maybe we'll see something like this in Europe more, but as these systems get developed, and if we hear this language, just to be aware of these concepts. Looking to the future. Next slide, please. So next I want to talk a little bit, so just with that background, talk a little bit about the structure of the vicinity and the MATEP networks here in Boston. Next slide, please. So first, the vicinity network has Boston and Cambridge customers. serving hospitals, biotech, commercial offices, higher ed, and specific places like the New England Aquarium. And you can see on this map, it's a little faded, but the three central plants are located there. It serves about 245 buildings and 71 million square feet. So to be very clear, again, Vicinity serves this region. It serves these customers in this area because that's where the plant's connected to in this location. Vicinity is the largest owner and operator of district energy systems in the US. So there's plants throughout the country, not just in Boston, 19 and 12 cities, and it's a privately held company. So this is not, again, like the example with a public utility providing steam or hot water. This is a privately held company that's providing this energy. Next slide, please. So what does Vicinity generate? They have a cogeneration plant, so they're generating electricity, but they're also utilizing this waste heat and generating steam for heating and hot water, as we discussed. So it's quite straightforward, but heating, hot water for the service area that it covers. Next slide, please. The other large system is the Medical Area Total Energy Plant, which serves the Longwood Medical and Academic Area, or the LMA. Contains a number of facilities. I won't read them all, but the Harvard Institutes of Medicine, the Children's Hospital of Boston, Beth Israel Medical Center. This also covers 74 buildings, 12 million square feet over 213 acres. So again, it's a large network serving the medical service and medical types of buildings. It's owned also by a private entity, which is a publicly traded company. Again, previously, the Vicinity is privately held. This is a publicly traded company, but again, at the end of the day, a private owner and operator of this system. Next slide, please. So this is a tri-generation plant, so it provides cooling, heating, and as a power plant, generating electricity. So again, from that generating electricity, utilizing waste heat, so you can have steam going to buildings for heating and hot water, chilled water, again, for central cooling, and described as a microgrid. So it creates its own electricity, which is, it can operate independently of the larger electrical grid in the city. And right from those uses, heating, hot water, sterilization, a specific use for the service area, and then air conditioning. Next slide, please. So next, want to talk about decarbonization of these district energy systems. So we've got one example with some public information from Vicinity's planned efforts, and then a few other examples of other similar and some different efforts happening around the US. And again, the point here being that, systems need to use energy to generate energy like any process. There's going to be greenhouse gas emissions, efficiency losses as there are through any process. So just as buildings are upgrading and improving their efficiency and capabilities, these district energy systems can do the same. They have different constraints, different considerations. It's a wholly different scale, but there's steps they can take to reduce fossil fuel usage and move on to more renewables, heat pump technology, and other sources. Next slide, please. So again, publicly available from Vicinity. To reduce the carbon content of their district steam plant, which is used for heating and hot water. Sort of three approaches that they're working towards. So electric boilers, which can help generate steam using electricity. That also, by virtue of using electricity, you have access to renewable energy, whether it's coming from solar, hydro, or other sources, but it's coming from electricity, not a fossil fuel. We have this note called COP of 9 to 100. That's essentially 9 to 100% efficient. So you put 1 unit of energy in and you get 1 unit of energy out. So electricity is generally 100% efficient. Electricity can be expensive. It may require more electricity, but it's wholly efficient, any electrical process. This is a multi-pronged approach as reported. So this includes also heat pumps. Heat pumps, COP of 200, that's 200% efficient. Not to get into all the logistics of heat pumps, but heat pumps are more than 100% efficient because they extract energy from other sources. And it's a wholly different approach to creating energy than, say, burning fossil fuels. The thought here is extracting heat from local water sources, as shown in this diagram. Heat can be extracted from the air, it can be extracted from water. So taking advantage of resources here, and providing ultra efficient steam generation. And the third is thermal storage. And so we've saw this in previous slides, but the idea here is that you can generate energy and then you can store it. There's all sorts of different reasons to store it. You can generate energy when it's cheaper, like overnight, when there's lower demands and people aren't using as much, and then you can keep it until you use it later. When the grid is under constraints, you can, again, choose to use it when there's not so much high demand on the grid or other restraints. And then you can also take more advantage of renewable energy. Renewable energy is also contingent on the weather, on the sun. It's not always, it's available at different amounts at different times. And so if you can receive energy when it's cheaper or more abundant, and you can store it and use it at a later time, you're not just reliant on things outside of your control. And there's more information on their website. It's pretty, if you just go to vicinityenergy.us, their e-steam and green steam plans are pretty publicly available right up front. Next slide, please. A few other examples. New York steam system, again, run by the local utility, but very similar plans, using heat from rivers, industrial processes, using heat pumps to capture that heat to preheat hot water and make steam, using electrical boilers, which can use renewable energy, and then thermal storage. So the same 3 points we talked about, Con Edison is looking at similar plans. Seattle, Washington, very different consideration. Thinking about taking waste heat from data centers, large data centers. It's probably safe to say there's a lot of data centers in Seattle. Taking waste heat away from sewer water. It's an interesting idea, but just trying to extract other places where heat would otherwise be wasted. Using biomass, so instead of using fossil fuels, using other materials that can be burned or combusted to generate energy. And then they're also looking at battery storage, so specifically storing electricity, again, to take advantage of rates and demand and time of day. Chicago, Illinois has a district cooling system, serving just, chilled water and cooling to downtown buildings. It's the largest in North America. And they're developing an ice battery, an ice thermal storage system where they literally make ice at night when electricity is cheapest. And then they melt it during the day to reduce peak load costs and carbon emissions. And again, the goal here is to reduce the strain on the grid, which is wholly contingent on electricity. And there's some buildings that have ice storage in there within the building, but this is interesting that a district energy system is considering using this. So all this is to say, depending on the nature of the plant, depending on what it makes, depending on where it's located, do they have access to, to rivers or wind? There's all sorts of different considerations as there are in buildings, and who do they serve and what do they serve them with? So there's not one size fit all for reducing, the carbon emissions from district plants, but they have to look at different approaches again, based on their local considerations. Next slide, please. Then last, we can go to the next slide. Just a brief note about BERDO and GHG emissions factors. Like all fuels, district energy and district steam have emissions factors on an MMBTU basis. So in this case, both Vicinity and MATEP provide their calculated emissions factors to the city of Boston. The city verifies them and posts them. And these are subject to change over time. So, as we just discussed, if the nature of their generation changes, then those emission factors can change. Just as electricity is scheduled to change over time, it's possible these will change as well. And emissions factors are posted on the website. Not the best link to publicly display, but very easy to find. Definitely can be tracked down after this presentation. And this is just a screenshot of, again, all the different types of fuels that are used in BERDO calculations, each with their own emissions factors. I know I was covering a lot of ground, wanted to fit in my time, but I think that's it for the slides. So if we have any questions or how you want to discuss, let me know.
Great. Thank you so much for that presentation, Adam. That was really, really helpful. So I'm going to ask the board members if they have any questions or comments. I want to start out with a question, and I apologize if you referred to this, but just want to understand, is there a requirement that sort of tips a user from being able to rely on publicly available electricity or an energy versus going to a district energy system, and sort of what's the relationship of a district energy system to the public utility supply?
Well, I think in Boston they're separate. So I guess from the perspective of, I guess is the question from the perspective of if you're a building or you're a building
Well, I guess
owner,
what I'm
or
wondering is like the users in Boston, so like a hospital user, are they required to go to district energy because their energy demands are so high? And or are they using a combination of energy from the district energy system and from the sort of the energy system that everyone else is drawing
I
from?
see.
Or
Yeah, I mean, I think in the first point, anyone can jump in. I think in the first point, I think it more comes down to that's how they were built and they're currently
Okay.
structured that way. So especially in these two, particularly with like the medical facilities, like I think like a campus, it was built, simple answer is probably built that way. And so that's how they're connected, that's how they're set up. If a building were to, get off it or switch, there would have to be a change that have to be made. But I think, I'm sure there's situations where there's some power pulled from the the utilities grid and not from the central plant. But I would believe that the purpose is that the primary majority of their energy is being pulled from these central plants. And again, I think it's more of a technical, historical consideration than a requirement. It's just that's how they were built and connected. If that answers your question.
I think so. I'm gonna pass around to other board members for questions. I see that board member Fergie has a hand raised, and I'm wondering if this if this is a specific question that can wait for your turn, or if you have a point of clarification that you want to add in.
Oh, sorry, I didn't know we were gonna do. Yeah. This can wait for my turn.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. Oh, great. So board member Ellis, do you have any questions or comments?
Yes, and Adam, thank you for your presentation, number one. Second, just for the use of languages, can we actually go back to the vicinity slide for one moment? I just want to check on something. And while we're going there, I'm not sure if they're coining the term green steam or whatever the proper terminology is, but can we actually go back maybe one more slide? Was there one before this? Okay, no, that you have the right one. Thank you, Ziggy or Diana. But I guess what I'm wondering is when they're saying, no, I remember it now. Forward one more slide. I'm so sorry. I'm messy today. There was a structure that Adam had shown about their future, essentially, or the strategy. This one, perfect. So when they're saying green steam, is it essentially a combination of all three of these things that you're showing here, electric boilers and heat pumps and thermal storage, or is there something else that defines green steam according to their strategy?
I think it's a combination of all these efforts because there's a lot of load to cover, and there's going to be you're going to put together different approaches. And so I think green steam is their term. So it's not a term that would be used nationwide. It's how they're defining this effort.
Okay, so I'll walk away understanding that this is a combination of effort and not just one singular effort that is attached to something. So probably a marketing term across the board. My second question is for the city, and I think I might look to Claudia here. Can we go to the slides about the emission factors, please? So the city verifies, I guess I'm wondering, can Claudia maybe, sorry if it's not Claudia, but I'm targeting her because I'm thinking she would be the one. But can you talk a little bit about what that verification process looks like for both Vicinity and Maytep, and what are the sort of inputs that they're providing you that you are saying, yes, this is correct? Because with privately held companies, I'm curious what that process looks like.
Well, actually, they're required to provide third-party verification.
Okay.
So they have a list of data that they need to send us, like the requirements for the calculations, so the methodology they need to follow to create these emissions factors. And they also are required to third-party verify that data in those calculations, through a third party verifying the accuracy of that data and that they follow the methodology according to regulations. And then we verify that indeed they meet, that we got all the data that we needed, that they follow the methodology, but the main, I guess, technical verification is third party.
Got it. And so those third parties are the third parties that the city had previously verified as the list of third-party reviewers. Is that correct?
So Vicinity and Maytem can send a proposed third-party verifier when we verify their credentials. So it's not, it's different, or it can be different from the third-party verifier list that is for reporting purposes.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. I have no further questions at this time. Back to you, Chair.
I'll just circle back on the first question there, just clarifying one thing Adam said about the green steam. I think it mainly focuses on the idea that the initial source of energy is, a renewable source of energy. So they're looking to utilize solar, wind, hydro as their input energy source for that electricity, compared to, if you were to run a boiler in your building, which is normally consuming a fossil fuel, you wouldn't necessarily consider that a green source of energy or a renewable source of energy. So I think the green part of their steam is, referring to the renewable or the green energy sources as their primary input.
Thank you, Jason. And knowing like currently, I think that the majority of it's still natural gas as it stands today. So I guess I'm curious about their percentage breakdown, how it looks going into the future.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry. Did you have a?
No, that was just a comment.
Okay,
Just
all right,
just
all right.
agreeing with Jason's statement. I appreciate
Okay,
it.
all right.
Yeah.
It sounded like a question at the very end. So
Yeah, if you go back to that slide, they have a timeline for I think their first electric boilers came online last year, and the idea that the electric heat pumps are going to come on in 2028, and then thermal storage. The heat pumps improve the efficiency of the electric boilers, like Adam mentioned. There's higher COP, and then the thermal storage just makes the overall process more efficient, and it allows them to use, to tap into different sources of energy at optimal times, whether that's a cost thing or an emissions thing. But yeah, the switch to electric, obviously the first electric boiler is coming on last year. So that's that process moving over from that gas to that green source of energy, whether that's solar or wind or any other renewable source.
Thanks. Thank you. Board Member Fergie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Adam, thank you so much for the presentation. This is very helpful. I'm particularly interested in the hospital decarbonization issue, and I was curious if you were aware of any other district energy systems that predominantly serve healthcare buildings similar to Maytap elsewhere in the state or country.
I'll be honest, off the top of my head, no, but I'd be happy to. Yeah, we're just looking at the different configurations and common types. Happy to. It's a good idea to send over some basically comparable networks. Jason, you may have a comment, but they're definitely out there.
I believe there's one or two small hospital networks in New York City that have their own district steam, or maybe not district steam, but a district utility system. Whether or not they produce steam or electric or a combination of those, I don't remember off the top of my head, but I believe there's at least one or two hospital, district networks in New York City.
Great. Okay, that's very helpful. Yeah, I can follow up as well with some of the more specific questions about that. I'd be interested in looking more into that especially with respect to the question of whether it was, whether it's renewable and whether that was a retrofit or part of the original design of the system. So thank you. Yeah, no further questions at this time.
Great. Yeah, please follow up.
Thank you. Board Member Ferris.
Hi, thank you. Yes, most of my experience with district systems is on higher education campuses where the utility is owned by the same entity that owns the buildings that use the energy produced. And so I'm wondering, in these cases where the utility system is owned by a different entity than whoever owns the buildings, what incentivizes decarbonization? Is it consumer demand, or are there other pressures, I guess, on these district utility systems to decarbonize their operations?
That's a great question. I think both. So certainly utilities have a much more in the instance of where it's a public utility producing the energy. Certainly, I think they're under much more regulatory pressure whether through mandates from a state level, like a public service commission, or they, for their own purposes, for their own reasoning, set their own goals and targets forthcoming. I think ultimately, yes, it's both. I think it's even if on the private side, certainly customer demand, because you could get to a situation where you do have a building performance standard like BERDO and other situations where if electrification, for example, is when it's working and scaling up to where staying on a district energy system just isn't tenable anymore because you're not going to meet your standards. Like building owners, will have to make a decision. I don't want to be on this network anymore. I have to, avoid these alternate compliance. It might be cheaper, whatever it is. They could disconnect from the system, and enter, set up their own individual systems. The example of it's just a one-off building. Again, the medical campus might be a little more complicated if there are any requirements. So I think it is user demand. And I think overall there's going to be some, baseline mandates on performance of any power plant in the state. So to give you a specific answer on what standards that these two operators would be under, I don't have an exact answer right now, but I would also be happy to look into that. Again, on the regulatory side, specifically, if they weren't concerned about consumer demand, is there anything making them? I'll get back to you on that. I'll have an answer on that.
All right, great, thank you.
Yep.
No further questions for me.
Thank you, Board Member Lattimore.
Yes, thank you. So just to follow up on Board Member Ferris's question and make sure I understand. So these district energy systems are not regulated in terms of emissions. I mean, I see the chart that was put up about emissions that the city, whatever. But are they required to meet certain or not? I'm not clear.
Oh, yeah, I
Certain
think with
emission
that,
standards.
I would feel comfortable saying there's certainly baseline emission standards that predate, I think, something like BERDO, that where like any power plant, any central system has a maintain, whether it's to the state, the federal government, local governments, there are, baseline, both pollution and performance standards into these systems. But I think something like like when we're talking about BERDO, we're talking about building performance standards where you're talking about explicitly greenhouse gas emissions intensity in buildings. I think that's different. So then you're talking about because if you think about oil, it's not illegal, simple, but it's not illegal for oil to produce as much emissions as it does. Like oil is just a high emissions fuel. BERDO can set up a structure in which, oil is calculated to emit a lot of emissions, and therefore your emissions intensity for your building is not good, and so you want to consider an alternate fuel source. So that's the consideration here, where BERDO standard isn't explicitly saying yay or nay about district steam, which is that the building owner has to decide what they want to do for their
Right.
building. But I think before that, there's baseline requirements for plants, but it's a separate conversation. We're getting into purely greenhouse gas emission standards and on this level. Does that make sense?
I think so. And then who sets those standards? Is it the locality? Does the city have any control over that? Or is it the state in terms of district energy systems? Who sets those standards?
I believe it's more on the state level. There's some federal standards and some state level standards.
So the city does not have a lot of input or control over district energy systems in that sense.
I will defer to the City of Boston team if there's anything I'm missing. And happy to confirm, but I usually view them as state level standards fundamentally.
Yeah, so the regulation of utilities like this is mainly state level and some federal levels.
Okay, thank you. And just as an aside, I think it'd be great to just be educated about the way utilities work for this, at least from my perspective. It would be good to understand that and have a similar training for this board and the general public, because I'm still trying to figure all this out, as I'm sure many people are. But the other question I had to do with the same slide that Board Member Ellis was looking at. When you said, if you could go back to that slide, and it's the vicinity 90.9 to 200 COP. One, I'm thinking about both the electric boilers and the electric heat pumps. Can you just, what does that mean again? COP equals 0.9 to 1 is like, I read it as that means their system is 90 to 100% efficient. Can you just go over that again?
Yeah, sure. COP is a coefficient of performance. And so 0.9 to 1, right, is 90 to 100% efficient. So 100% efficient is you put 1 unit of energy into a process and
Mhm.
you get the same amount of energy out. So in a 90% efficiency, you just lose 10% through
Uh-huh.
the process,
Okay,
just
got it.
wasted.
That's what I thought, but it has nothing to do with kind of how clean the plant is. It's just more how efficiently they use the energy. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, COP is like, right. No, that's a great question. COP is like we're using it when we talk about like a piece of equipment.
Okay.
Right, it's not specific to vicinity, it's specific to the like equipment type. So a heat pump would be more efficient than an electric boiler. It's not a function of vicinity owns a heat pump that is, you know, better or worse than the electric boiler. It's heat pumps generally are more efficient than the electric boilers. It's similar to like an LED light bulb being more efficient than an
I
incandescent
see.
light bulb.
So this is not a comment on how efficient vicinity is as a utility. It's more a comment on how efficient certain types of equipment is.
Correct. Right. So if
Okay.
you want to think of the electric boiler as, you know,
Yep.
incandescent's probably not a great example because incandescent light bulbs are not super efficient and 90% is
Mhm.
pretty good. But it's more a comment on the technology. So an electric boiler, you know, whether you bought it from one manufacturer or another, and it, again, not a comment on vicinity systems specifically, but an electric boiler will generally operate from 90 to 100% efficiency, and then a heat pump will operate with a COP of or 200% efficiency or higher, depending on a lot of conditions. So
Got it.
its heat source, you know, what the outside air conditions are, and all of that. So
Got it. Thank you. And then just one or so more questions. So with this slide, are you saying that vicinity, this publicly available decarbonization plans, that vicinity has indicated that it has moved to electric boilers for at least for some parts of its equipment, and then in 2028 it's moving to electric heat, or is this am I reading this wrong?
yeah, so this is based on their publicly available information. So they've indicated that they've started, you know, they've started some electric boilers in 2024. I don't remember the
Mm-hmm.
exact percentage of how much of
Mm-hmm.
their plant load that covers, but the idea would be that in 2028, the electric heat pumps are intended to come online. I believe they've already broken ground on that already. And then in 2032, the thermal storage is going to be
Mm-hmm.
added to that. So overall, each one of these things is meant to improve the performance of the plant. You know, are these technologies specific to vicinity? No. Anybody could buy an electric boiler,
Right.
anybody could buy an electric heat pump, anybody could implement thermal storage. The combination of these technologies makes vicinity's overall plant more efficient, but
Mhm.
it's
Got it.
nothing unique to their.
Thank you. Thank you. And so and MATEP is another district energy system, correct? And so do they have a publicly available decarbonization plan?
Not aware of one at this time.
Okay. And my last question is, with these systems, I mean, as you explained it really well, I just want to reaffirm or make sure I got it. So thank you for the explanations and the answers. But the plant is physically located in the vicinity near the buildings that they're serving, correct? So in this case, say for example, BU has a district is feeding off a district energy system, but then a mile down the street or however far down the street that Mass General Brigham is a separate district energy system. So it's not like one system serving, all is in the vicinity of the buildings, correct?
Yeah, I think in general, right? Because like fundamentally, and just to demystify it, like they are physically connected. Like there is a pipe underground connecting them. So ultimately, a network can be very large, but there's eventually a size constraint on how far they want to reach or how far they're able to reach. But
Okay,
and
thank you.
networks, yeah, they can be very, very large, but you're exactly correct. They're proximity to each other for the most part.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
No other questions? Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think there's, fundamental limits on how far you can send the energy before it becomes, it's not advantageous anymore. At that point, it might be more efficient or cheaper, or however you want to look at it. It might be better to build another district energy system more local. So for example, you wouldn't necessarily want to feed Boston from New York City. Like to send heat in a pipe from New York City all the way to Boston, probably not going to be super efficient because there's losses along the way. So yeah, there's fundamental limits to where it doesn't become cost effective or energy effective, or however you want to set that limit, but there is limits.
Thank you. No more questions.
But there's still one plant. Like, I don't want to pick on Longwood, but like there's one. Are you saying that there's a separate like mini plant for each sort of system of buildings? There's one plant for that whole neighborhood, right?
That's right.
Or like there's one downtown or in Chinatown, I guess, right?
If you go back to the vicinity map, I think there was 3 separate plants.
Okay, that's what I thought. I just want to make sure you weren't. Okay,
That's right.
Okay, great. I did see that board member Ellis had a hand up. I didn't know if it was a follow-up to one of the
Yeah,
questions.
it was just thank you, Chair. It was just a clarification question on that, the COP 200, because I'm sorry, 200%. So does that mean, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm just trying to understand the jargon here. So they would be generating, putting out 2 times the amount of energy that it normally is putting out right now. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah, so this can get into a very technical conversation
Okay.
of how heat pumps work. But yes, it is confusing to think of it as 200% efficient, because the question becomes, how are you operating at over 100% efficiency? That gets into a very technical conversation, but it's it fundamentally operates differently than an electric boiler. So if you're measuring its efficiency, it's quote unquote 200%. But yeah.
All right, I'll take that.
Jason, fair to say you put in 1 unit of energy and you get 2.
Yeah.
Which is why they're so appealing.
Right.
All right. Thank you. Board Member Stovall, do you have any questions or comments?
No, not right now. I mean, basically everybody asked the questions that I wanted to ask. So, especially with the proximity of the plants, I saw the map, but I just wanted to know, did they have any plans to add any more plants? That's my question. That was the only one that wasn't answered.
Yeah, I know. I'm not aware of any.
Not that we're aware of, yeah.
Because the thing is, sometimes it's just easier to just take and build a whole new plant with all the technology and just take one offline. So that's why I was asking that question.
Just looking at their publicly available information, the plant design does call for the electric boilers, the heat pumps, and the thermal storage. Obviously I can't speak for the timeline and the costs and any challenges vicinity might face in that regard, but it does appear that the intent is to implement those systems by those timelines that they've presented. So yeah, the original design includes all 3 components.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you. This was super helpful and informative. I think I think I could speak on behalf of the board and just say this was a really, really helpful walkthrough and use of the time this evening. I know that we have another agenda item that we want to be able to spend some time on. Are there any final questions or comments from board members that we didn't address? Gail, sorry, board member Lattimore.
You can call me Gail. Jessica. So I guess I'd like to just reiterate my comment about a training around for the board and therefore the general public, if it's a public, since it's a public meeting, on just, the utility system in general. I mean, I think that it would be helpful to understand, because it's contextual. All of this is contextual to our work, like, how are utilities regulated? What, just is in a way that's simple and hopefully like this presentation was done. I think for me, I would benefit from, like, how are they regulated? Who regulates them? Who's covered under them? How does the public impact, the whole public utility process? This is a big mystery, I think, for a lot of people, and it shouldn't be. So I'd like to advocate for that.
Board Member Stovall.
I second that. I kind of wish we could do one of these at least once a quarter, or at least maybe even if we could afford to do it once a month, even if it's just for 15 minutes.
Yeah. No, I think that those are great comments, and I also appreciate that we sort of like jumped into the presentation around this very specific energy system before the general. So I think that would be a great follow-up.
Thank you.
Great. Board Member Ellis.
On a separate topic, and I also third what Board Member Lattimore shared, but from a city standpoint, I am finding myself very curious about what MATEP may be doing, or hoping to do, given the proximity of all those buildings that are subjected to the ordinance. And so I'm impressed that we were able to get a very clear presentation about, vicinity, not that, they needed to provide that to the public, but they made that publicly available. But I'm just wondering, based on the city's conversation thus far with MATEP, do you have any sort of sense of what direction they might be going in? Is it something that they're even, talking about? Are they thinking about the multi-pronged approaches that vicinity is thinking about? But just wanted to take a second to ask the city of their perspective on MATEP. So
Yeah, we have conversations with MATEB as well as Vicinity on their long-term planning, but there is no set long-term decarbonization plan for MATEB in the same way that we have for Vicinity that is publicly available. I think their team is working on considering multiple options, but they have not published or made us aware of any specific decision that they have made so far.
thank you, Claudia. That does make me nervous about the first compliance year with respect to the medical and healthcare industries in that area. So I appreciate that, Chair. That's all, Chair.
You. That was helpful. That was a helpful thing to address. If I don't see any hands up right now, I think we should go on to our second agenda item. Thank you, Adam and Jason, so much. This was super helpful, and as you heard, hopefully we'll have you back soon. Hopefully that'll be good for you too. So we're gonna move on to here's some information about the proposed updates to BERDO regulations. Hopefully we'll have a little more time for discussion than last time. So I will hand it over to Claudia for the presentation.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so I know we presented the key or like the main proposals that we presented to the Air Pollution Control Commission, to the review board, but I know we had a rush agenda back then. So today I'm gonna present all those more key proposals again, but we're gonna stop at each proposal so that we can have any questions or comments from the board. And hopefully that way we can make sure that we can gather your feedback better than a very long presentation and then questions and answers on multiple things. Next slide, please. So this is just a reminder of the timeline for these 2025 BERDO regulations update. We already had several milestones that would hit, from launching a survey. We had our first reviewer meeting where we discussed proposals. On June 11, we presented the formal draft language and proposals to the Air Pollution Control Commission, and the APCC voted to open the first public comment period on this draft language, which will remain open until July 15 at 5 p.m. In between, just last week, we also had a public listening session just to provide an additional opportunity for building owners, property managers, and the community in general to hear about these regulations update and hear more feedback from the public. Again, everyone is free to submit formal public comment letters to the Air Pollution Control Commission until July 15. Today, we'll present the same proposals. We'll have some time for feedback from you. And the plan is that once the public comment period is closed on July 15, the BERDO team will review the feedback that we receive, will make any necessary changes to the draft language, and will present the revised proposals to the Air Pollution Control Commission on July 30th. As always, the APCC would then have discretion to either adopt those regulations in the very rare scenario that we get everything right and all the public comments say adopt everything immediately. But usually that does not happen, and we at least need another public comment period. So likely at that hearing, the Commission will have the discretion to open a second public comment period and have more time for feedback in this process. Next slide, please. Okay, last time I gave an overview of these proposals. Just as a reminder, in this regulations update, we are only targeting regulations and policies and procedures that are related to flexibility measure application processes, third-party verification, and existing BERDO procedures related to certain cases of reporting, like campus level reporting and so on. This is not an opportunity to change the ordinance, and we're not considering other significant changes to regulations at this time. Next slide, please. Okay, so our first key proposal, you may remember, is related to third-party verification. So currently under our ordinance and regulations in 2026 and every verification year thereafter, meaning every 5 years, all building owners are required to provide third-party verification of their reported data for the last 5 calendar years prior. Meaning in 2026, building owners would have to submit third-party verification for not only 2025 data, but all the other 5 calendar years prior. What we are proposing here is to, one, differentiate the third-party verification requirements between 2025 and 2030 buildings, and streamline third-party verification requirements for buildings' first emission compliance year. So in the draft language, what you will find is that for 2025 buildings, which are the largest buildings covered under BERDO, we are proposing that owners would only need to provide third-party verification of 2025 calendar year data in 2026. And then every other verification year, they would provide the 5 calendar years of third-party verification as normal. For 2030 buildings, we're proposing that they would not be required to provide third-party verification in 2026, given that they're not subject to emissions compliance for 2025. Then in 2031, owners would be required to provide third-party verification of their 2030 data, and then every verification year thereafter, they would be required to provide the 5 calendar years of third-party verification. So what we're hoping to do here is, one, streamline third-party verification during the first emissions compliance year, both from the perspective of building owners, but also from staff capacity. We're hoping to reduce cost of compliance for the first emissions compliance year, and we're still guaranteeing that we have third-party verification for the critical data that we need to enforce emissions compliance. So for example, to verify if a 2025 building complied with their 2025 emission standard, we don't need data from 2024 or 2023. So again, we're only verifying the data that we need for that first emissions compliance year. And this would not impact the requirement that all buildings have to always provide third-party verification for their first year of reporting. So for example, if a new building comes online and covered into BERDO in 2027, they would still need to provide third-party verification that year. So I'll stop here for any questions or comments from the board, and Chair, I would defer to you on what order we should follow for that.
Yeah, since we have a number of questions, I'm just gonna recognize hands rather than going through the full alphabetical order for each one. So I don't have particular questions on this one. But yes, that's exactly what I was looking for. Board Member Ellis.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Claudia, first off, I think this is a great update to clarify the distinction between the larger buildings and the buildings that are under that limit. However, I am finding myself a little confused about the 2031 year, because it sounds like you would be ignoring the way it's written. It seems like the larger buildings would be excused from that verification, and I'm wondering if there's a way to just say all of your buildings need to go through verification in 2030. So the first one just being that subset, where the next 2031 should be everything. It is how I've been understanding that. Is that incorrect?
So 2025 buildings would need to provide third-party verification of the 5 calendar years prior in 2031. So 2031 is a verification year according to the ordinance. So maybe there's a way to make this clearer, but no, the intention is that in 2031, basically, 2025 buildings would have 5 years of third-party verification, whereas 2030 buildings would only have 1 year because it's their first emissions compliance year.
So within 2031, would the buildings, I'm gonna change the language here for a second, but will the buildings over 35,000 square feet also need to go through some verification in 2031?
Yes, and for the 5 calendar years prior.
Got it. So I just, there might be a jargon here that may be shifting away from the terminology 2025 buildings versus 2030 buildings, because I can see myself getting lost and thinking, oh, I'm just only verifying this 20,000 to 34,999 here, and maybe just clarifying the language that, this will be the first year that the 20,000 is happening, but it includes everything beyond that 34,900. So I don't have the right way to say that, but yeah, okay.
And this language is kind of truncated and summarized from the actual draft language that has
Oh,
more
I'm sorry.
complete sentences, but
Okay.
yes.
Okay. All right. If it's clarified in the drafted language, then I'll trust you. But it just reading it here, I was getting lost and wondering whether or not the 35,000 square feet would be going through their verification again. But thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Ellis. Does anyone else have questions on this one? All right, why don't we go on to the next one?
Thank you, Sigi. Okay, so the next proposal is related to application deadlines for flexibility measures. So as you may remember, in our current regulations, we have specific deadlines to apply for building portfolios, individual compliance schedules, and both types of hardship compliance plans. And right now it's set up so that building owners essentially have to apply a year in advance to use a specific flexibility measure. So for example, if someone wanted to use a building portfolio in 2025, the regulation set the application deadline to September 1st, 2024. And the original idea behind this is that building owners would be able to plan before an emissions compliance year and have certainty on whether they would have a flexibility measure in advance of a year. However, in doing a lot of outreach and engaging with building owners, we realized this is not necessarily the way that building owners are thinking about BERDO compliance. And also a lot of building owners and property managers are still becoming acquainted with BERDO and are just like realizing that they have these different flexibility measures to use. And even if they wanted to do a good faith effort to use these, for example, for their first emission compliance year in 2025, the boat has already sailed for that in our current regulations. So what we are proposing is instead that application deadlines are for the same year that building owners want to use a flexibility measure. So for example, to use a building portfolio in 2025, then apply by September 1st of 2025. You will see that we also included language to allow the reviewer to extend this deadline for any given year at their discretion. And we're doing this because we have in the past experienced unexpected issues just even with reporting, where like Eversource changed their account numbers, or there could be issues with our reporting platform, or other unexpected consequences that make it more difficult for building owners to meet these application deadlines. So just getting ahead of that scenario in the future, we want the reviewer to have the discretion to extend deadlines each year if they see necessary. So you will see for building portfolios, ICS, and short-term hardship compliance plans, we have the same deadline date, but applied to the same year. But for long-term hardship compliance plans, instead of April 1st, we're also extending to July 1st, again, of the same year. Yeah, I guess that's the gist of this proposal, and I'll stop there again for questions or comments.
Thank you. Do any board members have specific comments on this one? Okay, I think we're hearing no comments because this has been well explained, sort of how this will make the process work more smoothly.
Perfect. And I would add for 2025, our tentative timeline is that these regulations would be adopted mid-September. So the deadline would have passed for this year. So our plan is essentially to come to the board to request an extension for 2025 after these regulations are adopted, just to ensure that building owners still have that option for 2025.
Okay.
Yeah. Next slide, please. Okay, our third proposal is about enabling building owners to extend voting timelines for flexibility measures. So as you well know, the reviewer has certain timelines or deadlines to make a decision on applications, and our current regulations set different timelines according to the type of building portfolio application, or if it's an ICS or a long-term hardship. These sort of timelines are very important for building owners and property managers to get a sense of when they should expect to hear a decision from the review board. However, we have also cases of building owners that request to have their hearing at a later date because their schedule doesn't work for their team, or they want additional time to prepare their presentation to the board. So we want to give building owners the option to request the review board to make a decision at a later timeline than the default that is required in these regulations. And we want to make sure that legally the review board is able to do that. So in the red line language, you would see the same sort of voting timelines for the review board, but just adding that the owner can also request a later date for that hearing or meeting where a decision is made. I'll stop here again just for any additional questions.
Our board member Faruqi.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Claudia. This has been very helpful. Just to clarify, under the revised language, would the review board have the authority to extend the voting timeline absent engagement from the applicant?
So, and under the current proposal, no, only the building owner could request an extension of that.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, I think this is, I broadly agree with the need for this kind of a change, because I think this is, I know that these timelines have been a challenge in a few different cases. I would also propose that we grant the review board the authority to request an application extension on the voting timeline as well, particularly just because of special conditions that we may want to place on the application. That's certainly on its own a lengthy process where I know many of us are engaging with constituents or other stakeholders. And then, of course, there's a whole back and forth that city staff are having with the applicant. And, you know, in many, I could imagine cases in which an applicant may not want special conditions and would then want to then run out the clock or not grant an approval for an extension so as to cut off the review board's ability to impose any kind of special conditions. Certainly in that case, the review board could choose to deny the application altogether and then make them come back to the table, but that would also be, in the aggregate, more work for the applicant because they'd have to reapply. So it may be easier if, you know, we just have the authority to do that. And I wouldn't imagine this being an issue in many cases, but certainly could in some.
Thank you. We'll consider that.
That's a really helpful point. Are there other comments or questions?
Yeah, I mean, I do want to clarify. So, you know, to some extent, to Hassan's point, although I hadn't thought about the run out the clock kind of piece, but or a later date upon request of the owner. Is there any time frame for the later date, or is it in you know, not determined, no need for a timeline for the later date upon request of the owner?
So at the moment, it's open to the request of the owner. I think like normally the incentive to get a decision like is on the building owner wanting to know if they get approved or not. So I don't see a building owner saying, can I do this in 3 years? Because they're coming for flexibility to achieve compliance, but open to suggestions if you feel like this should be
Yeah,
constrained more.
no, I don't have a suggestion, just trying to wrap my head around like what that means, you know, at a later date. So thank you.
Board Member Stovall?
Yeah, I just was thinking that kind of the same thing, but I think we should have a time or at least an amount of days that we start with, and if we have to do another extension, then, you know, because the thing is, if you leave it open like that, like was said earlier, the clock could be purposely ran out, and, you know, it's just trying to keep order and structure. I think we should have a block of days that we say, this is what we'll do, and if they need more time, then they have to come with a genuine, legitimate reason as to why they need more time. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. I want to concur that I think perhaps putting some number of days based on our experience to date would be more helpful than sort of just stating later date. Any other Board Member Ellis?
Seeing that this is the direction that we're sort of headed in, if we do put in a number of days, because I do agree with Claudia's point about the clock is arbitrary in the sense that they're going to come up against a emissions threshold at some point. And so if they don't complete their application, then they're subjected to the emission threshold that they have. However, if we put, say, some sort of date and they don't come back within that date, and as Board Member Stovall said, they have to have a compelling reason to ask for a new one. If, say, for some reason they do not ask for another one, what then happens to their application? You know, is it now canceled? Is it now like? I think if we're going to go into putting in dates, I think I start now getting into some sort of language of what happens to that application. So I figure, you know, I'll defer to the city if they have any ideas about how to sort of shape that language about if you miss this deadline and you don't come requesting another extension, then your application is deemed invalid, or, you know, you will have to start the process over again, which I would hate for that to be the case because Diana, you know, you and I spoke about this earlier. There are times where there are rollovers or, you know, layoffs, and so the person that may have been responsible for said application may not be able to complete it on behalf of the organization. So stop there.
Yep, thank you. These are all good points. So we'll think about it for the next round.
Just because Board Member Ellis asked, I'm just curious if staff have any thoughts on this one. It would be helpful to hear.
On what would happen if someone doesn't show up to their hearing?
On sort of what would happen if we put a number of dates on, like sort of what would the consequences look like, or would there not really be any?
I mean, well, Diana, I'm curious to see what you think.
Yeah, I was gonna cover sort of what happens now. So right now, let's say we review an application, it's deemed incomplete for some reason. We sort of give the applicant an opportunity to edit or change or update anything that we view as missing or there's a gap, and we don't put a time limit on their end to make that change. And it has happened where like months down the line, someone raises their hand and say, "Oh, so and so who was working on that no longer works here. I'm picking this project back up. Can you please help me figure out where we ended up last time?" And so really, I think by default, what happens there is that their application just doesn't get to move forward, but that's because it's sort of in their court, if that makes sense. And the consequence is that they then don't have the opportunity to know if they have their flexibility measure or not. So it really the incentive is really on the building owner to try to get the process to move forward because then it helps them plan, it helps them know if they're going to meet their emissions limit, etc. So I think in this situation, if we did have like please let us know within 14 days, if as an example, I think what would probably happen is that the application would probably just be paused and it would probably then need to be picked up again. That being said, I don't think it would roll over, for example, like in the next year. Like I think eventually it probably would have to still be within the same year, but that's just like generally what I would think. But, this is not something we've explicitly talked about in this example.
Board Member Stovall.
Yeah, so when that happens, how many hours are you having to re-engage to take on that application all over again? I mean, how much money is the city gonna lose by having to start the process all over again, even though it's been paused? That's my question.
Yeah, I'm happy. So we try to work, it hasn't happened a ton, but we try to work with folks so they don't have to start from the beginning. We sort of share what we have, we share what we have with them and we share what we call, which is our notice of incompleteness. And in that notice, we really pinpoint and highlight all the things that we think are missing. And so we kind of say like, here's our starting point, here are the things that we're missing, let us know if you have questions about those. So we kind of help them start where they left off, if that makes sense. And we try to avoid as much as possible starting from the beginning because it's kind of it's kind of a long process. And we try to help people move along.
But what if we had a major change in the time that they put down the application? Now you have to start all over again, right?
Yes, I think if it's more than, let's say it's a new year in that situation, I would probably recommend starting from the beginning.
Yeah, but this, you still have the time to determine that. That's what I'm trying to get at. But okay, I understand. I get it.
And I think we just should remember that flexibility measures are optional. It's a way to help compliance for building owners. So they're not obligated to, they can withdraw an application. They can decide to terminate one of their flexibility measures. It is not required for all building owners to come to the board to request flexibility. So ultimately, their interest on getting through this process lies on the building owner rather than the review board or the city. Like we don't have a metric of we need 500 portfolios by this year. This is a way that building owners can choose to comply.
For Alice.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Claudia, for that statement. I agree. I think now that I've heard Diana's perspective about sort of this notice of incompleteness, and I start to wonder, are there applications currently sitting on the city's desk that may just need to go through a denial process because it's sitting so long? But that's just a point of thought for right now. I'm not saying there's a direction that needs to happen at this very second, but we have the power as the board to also deny the application, especially if it becomes so old that it's like you're going to have to start over again. So I wonder if there's a way to not sort of keep things on this like to-do list or a long to-do list for you all so that you can sort of wipe out that list in some sense. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments on this one? All right, let's move on to the next one.
Thank you, Siggy. So the next proposal we have is to remove the requirement to record decisions in the registry of deeds for most flexibility measures. So currently in our regulations, building owners are required to record any decision related to an approval, modification, or termination of a flexibility measure with the registry of deeds. The purpose of this regulation that was originally put there was to make sure that new owners or an entity that is thinking of buying a BERDO building could have information about whether BERDO compliance for that specific building depends on a flexibility measure right through the deed. In practice, we found that building owners, a lot of them have been struggling to meet this requirement. There are many reasons for this. For example, the cost to make this recording with the registry of deeds can vary a lot depending on how the deed was set up in the first place. Sometimes the way that BERDO IDs and parcels are set up within the city of Boston do not match how that specific building is set up in the registry of deeds. And specifically for building owners that own and develop deed restricted affordable housing, these can also add additional legal costs according to requirements that they're set up through like state or federal funding and regulations. So what we are proposing here is to eliminate this requirement to record decisions with the registry of these deeds with all flexibility measures except for long-term hardship compliance plan. This is because long-term hardship compliance plan is still the most significant flexibility under BERDO. It's the one that can provide the most relief to any BERDO building for compliance. So we want to keep this as a way to still have a way to notice new buyers of a BERDO building, of being aware of these. In lieu of recording decisions, what we added in regulations is that new and old building owners can also request the Environment Department to keep a letter of compliance for any specific building. So hopefully that can sort of complement eliminating this recording requirement. But here we're also open to any suggestions on how to increase the visibility of BERDO compliance at point of sale of buildings. Another aspect that I want to highlight here for long-term hardship compliance plans, even though we're keeping the recording requirements, we're proposing to exempt deed restricted residential buildings and city buildings from that requirement. So I think I'll stop there again for questions or comments.
I understand the hardships here, and I think this makes sense in terms of the challenges that it can create, but it would be helpful if you could clarify just especially for our own records, what are the ways that property owners are committing to their plan? So in lieu of it being recorded, how else are we documenting it? And yeah, that's my first question.
I can take that. So I think the easiest way is through our annual disclosure process. So actually all the data that is reported to BERDO in terms of energy, water use, and emissions compliance is publicly available every year. So anyone could go and search for a specific BERDO ID or address and see their current energy use, projected emissions levels if they have reported. What we're proposing in addition to that already existing process of annual disclosure is that any building owner that is selling a building and the new building owner that is acquiring that building, they could also request a letter of compliance from the Environment Department that could also just certified or give specific information about a specific BERDO ID or building at the point of sale. I'm not sure if that addressed the question.
No, that's helpful. But that was my second question is, so the point of the recording is that, or one of the advantages of the recording is that if the property changes hand, the building is sort of still officially accountable. So in this case, the onus would be on the property owner to request that letter that would indicate to the buyer that there's a plan in place that they need to work towards. But it's possible that that new buyer would need to, if for some reason they sort of got off the plan, right, they would basically be required to come back in.
By plan, you mean like the flexibility measure?
Yeah, or yes, if there are requirements on, property owner A and they sell to property owner B, the transition is stated in the form of a letter that they may or may not include in the transaction. And then either the new property owner would be implementing the same plan, or they would likely be called in by the city to create a new plan.
Yeah, so the onus would be on the people that are involved in the transaction to request that letter. And whether they keep the flexibility of measure or not kind of depends on the situation. For example, if someone sells a building that is part of the building portfolio and now it's just a new building owner, they're not transferring the whole portfolio, right? Like that is just now a single building that is not part of a building portfolio. So the letter would just make the new building owner understand, yes, this building is currently under compliance, but take into account that it was part of a building portfolio.
Right. So like the absolute worst case scenario here would then be that, or not worst, well, sort of worst case is like,
yeah,
you sell one building, your portfolio size is reduced and that new building is small enough that it was kind of on a compliance plan and now it may no longer be required to adhere to BERDO if it's it seems like it's kind of an edge case where that would happen.
No, so in order to have a flexibility measure, you need to be a BERDO building. So there is no case where selling a building that is part of a portfolio is suddenly not a BERDO building because they needed to be a BERDO building on its own right to be part of the portfolio. So it will not change BERDO coverage. It will just like change how they comply if they're not longer part of a portfolio.
Okay. Right. Board member Faruqi.
Thank you. I really appreciate you working on this because this is something I've heard as a concern from the community. So I'm glad we can fix it. A few questions. First, on the last point about how this does not apply to city buildings, does that also include buildings that are owned by city quasi-agencies like the BRA, EDIC?
Yes, so those are all considered city buildings.
Great, thanks. To the point that Board Member Boatwright made earlier about how we can still communicate something to buyers of a new BERDO building, is it possible or have we engaged with the Register of Deeds about any kind of communication or guidance that they can provide to buyers of a large building just so that they're at least generally aware of the law, or is that already being done?
Well, the review board team has been in contact with the Registry of Deeds a lot, but I don't think that specific solution has been considered to my knowledge.
Got it. Okay, sounds good. Thanks.
Yeah, keep going.
Yeah, I guess my last, this is not really a question, but just a concern, because I know that when enacting special conditions, making some kind of agreement with the particular building owner itself, and that should that building owner then, divest of that building, if the condition was, specific to the building, for example, we're going to use a particular firm to, we're going to use MBEs for renovation of that building. Should they divest of that building, then that contract would no longer be deemed valid. But what would stop a building owner from simply divesting of that building to its own subsidiary company in order to get out of the condition, but still be able to retain some kind of ownership and control of the building? Yeah, no worries if you don't have an answer.
Well, I'm not sure that is necessarily related to this proposal, or I don't see the direct connection. But I mean, BERDO cannot regulate whether or not a building owner sells or buys a property. However, for many, like for example, for a building portfolio that has special conditions that need to demonstrate common ownership. So if you have a special condition on a building portfolio and they just sell their own building to a subsidiary, it cannot be part of the portfolio unless they show that common ownership again. So I think there's cases where that sort of trick wouldn't like work anyway. And certain flexibility measures are transferable, but others aren't. So I don't know that there is like necessarily a direct implication that is like generalized.
Got it. That's super helpful. Thank you. And I agree, it's not directly pertinent to this language. So I think this looks good. Thank you. And no further questions for me.
Are any other questions on this one? Great. Let's move on to the next one.
Thank you, Ziggy. Okay, so the other proposal is to enable the review board to grant exemptions on solar requirements without the need to apply for a hardship compliance plan. So as a reminder, our BERDO regulations set up certain requirements so that building owners can take credit for any solar electricity or associated generation credits that they get from solar systems, even if they're not retiring the associated mass class 1 RECs in 2 scenarios. One, if the solar system is located in Boston, and the other one, if the solar system is located in the Eversource Eastern Massachusetts territory. The solar system began operation before 2024, and that specific BERDO building began receiving that electricity or net metering credits before 2024. Right now, if a building owner, let's say they enter into a contract for a solar system in Eastern Mass in 2024, but for delays in utilities, contracts, permitting, that solar system did not go online until 2025. Right now, the only option that building owner has to still be able to use that solar system is to go through a hardship compliance plan, which, as we know, is the most complex application or flexibility measure that we have under BERDO. So what we are proposing is that based on extenuating circumstances, owners may request the review board to approve the use of electricity or generation credits without that corresponding REC retirement from solar generating systems that are located in Eastern Mass that do not meet those requirements of beginning operation or beginning to receive the electricity and credits before 2024. The reviewer already has a similar authority to grant exemptions of additionality requirements for power purchase agreements. So we see this proposal as kind of mirroring that authority that the reviewer already has in the renewable energy space, and just being able to streamline these cases of building owners that did the right thing before 2024, but for some reason are not able to meet that specific scenario due to extenuating circumstances. So I'll stop there also for comments or questions.
So are extenuating circumstances, is the definition of that at the discretion of the board?
Yes. These are not like defined specific, there's no specific list or anything in regulations.
Okay. All right, are there other questions on this one? Great. All right, let's move on.
Thank you. Okay, the 6th key proposal is to better delineate roles between the Air Pollution Control Commission, the BERDO Review Board, and Environment Department. Specifically, we have 2 key changes I want to highlight here. So historically, we have sort of developed regulations and policies and procedures at the same time. So just by virtue of those processes, both regulations and policies and procedures have historically been voted on and adopted by the Air Pollution Control Commission. However, we are proposing that following these regulations update, policies and procedures should be adopted by the BERDO Review Board moving forward. This is because policies and procedures set very specific rules that, by the nature of being in policies and procedures, are meant to be more regularly updated. So examples are emissions factors, or the contents of reports that building owners have to do to their review board, or data sources for or environmental justice mapping tool. So there are more very specific rules that sort of should be updated with the day-to-day implementation of BERDO. And of course, the BERDO Review Board is the body that has that more direct and constant connection with the implementation of BERDO. So we feel that it is a good fit for the Review Board to take over policies and procedures going forward. And the second related proposal is that in our regulations, there's sometimes language that refers to guidance adopted by the Commission. Sometimes it mentions Environment Department. In practice, Environment Department creates guidance either independently or on behalf of the Commission. So examples of these are the How to Report Guide, the How to Report Solar Guide, or BERDO Compliance Guide. So we, in our red line language, we made some changes to clarify that guidance is created by the Environment Department. So if these changes were to be adopted, then the sort of roles would be delineated as regulations are adopted by the APCC, policies and procedures by the Review Board, and guidance by the Environment Department. So I'll stop here as well.
Oh, do any board members have any questions on these proposed changes? All right, excellent.
Perfect.
I think we can move on. Thank you to the staff. I know that it is. This is a lot.
Yeah.
So, and I guess we're gonna go on to a couple more things too.
Yeah. Perhaps in the interest of time, I can highlight just very specific things in the other draft language, and then
Okay.
just skip time broadly on that. Let's see, next slide, please. So in addition to those key proposals, you saw there is more red line language that provides clarifications, so fixes things like typos or adds like procedures that already exist under BERDO into the regulations or policies and procedures. So I'll just quickly highlight some of the things that I think would be most interesting to this board. So you will see language that refers to Energy Star portfolio manager to clarify that the Environment Department can designate alternative reporting platforms or sources for emissions factors, just in case there was any changes to that program at the federal level. And you will also see new language reflecting campus level reporting or buildings that share energy or water system, as well as reporting for buildings that serve as power plants or central power generation facilities for other buildings. And you would also see that language about the compliance status letter for other buildings, for buildings during transactions of selling and buying. Next slide, please. Another just quick change to highlight, we are proposing to change the deadline for the Environment Department to publish emissions factors from April 1st to April 15. This is because district energy systems, as you heard today, need to provide their emissions factors by April 1st of each year. So we're just giving ourselves a bit of time in between to receive those numbers and then publish them, and just make sure we can do our reviews and incorporate those numbers into our grid emissions factors. We just made some clarifying language. We made clear that pending applications for flexibility measures do not stay building owners' obligations under BERDO. Next slide, please. In hardship compliance plans, we made just some changes on certain restrictions. So in our current version of regulations, newly constructed buildings or buildings that undergo zoning review and are subject to net zero carbon zoning could not be added to a building portfolio with a hardship compliance plan. We are updating that so that that can be added to a building portfolio with a hardship compliance plan, as long as that building still meets their zoning requirements. So this would be the same as a building. Like currently, any net zero carbon building can be added to a building portfolio. So we are just extending that to building portfolios with hardship. And we also removed the restriction that existing buildings cannot be added to a building portfolio with a short-term hardship compliance plan. You would also see some changes on review board related language. So removed the language related to city council approvals in 3 months. And updating that if a review board member misses 6 consecutive meetings, they may be considered vacated, but not shall. And yeah, your other clarifying language. Next slide. In policies and procedures, you would also see some changes like a new list of credentials for third-party verifiers, a lot of clarifying language. We made explicit certain factors that, or like considerations we use for our emissions factors, like including the renewable portfolio standard. We included the formulas that we use to calculate emissions. None of these are new changes. They reflect our current practice, and we're just making it more explicit and visible in policies and procedures. Next slide. Also updated that the reviewer would be the one to update the definition of Greater Boston as it relates on who qualifies as community-based organizations. And then you will see that the Appendix A that was previously in regulations has been moved to policies and procedures. And this is the appendix that matches property types under Energy Star Portfolio Manager to the building use categories under BERDO. And then finally, you will also see an update to the projected grid emissions factors that I will explain in the next slide. Okay, so you will see we made some updates to our projected grid emissions factors. This was necessary for 2 reasons. One is that our old projections had been calculated during the ordinance process, and these factors were used to, for example, set emission standards for the different BERDO building use types and so on. But those projections are no longer updated to the current RPS Class 1 requirements that the state has. They do not longer reflect the conditions of the grid, and also the methodology that was used to calculate those old projections no longer aligns with the methodology we use for annual grid emissions factors. So we made we're updating those projections starting in 2027 to reflect that the new RPS Class 1 requirements, to align methodologies with our annual grid emissions factor, and to make sure that these projections reflect the latest data that we have about the grid. Next slide, please. This is sort of a comparison of the different ways that one can calculate grid emissions in general. All projections are what we call an average emissions factors that take a snapshot of the grid at a given time. And the way that those types of emissions factors are used is that you just multiply your electricity use by an average emissions factor. We do not use this approach in BERDO because we want to make sure that BERDO building owners can take credit for the renewable energy that Massachusetts acquires as part of the RPS Class 1 requirements. So the approach that BERDO uses is that we give credit for the RPS Class 1 as part of the calculation for emissions for electricity use, which is sort of what you see in the second and third. So the way we calculate electricity emissions is that we multiplied our electricity use by the percentage that is not matched by the RPS Class 1, and then times our emissions factor. In order to make this calculation, you need to use what it's called a residual emissions factor. Again, all projections are not that type of emissions factor, they're an average emissions factor. So this is also why we're doing these new projections that allow us to give building owners credit for the RPS Class 1 without making any accounting errors. And again, with updates of the latest requirements under state law and conditions of the grid. Next slide. And then in this slide, it's just to see the comparison on how emissions look like, depending on how you calculate them. So the black line, you will see what emissions look like for 1 megawatt hour of electricity use if we were just using our electricity use, and the average emissions factor, which is our old projections. You can see that is the highest emissions because we're not giving building owner credit for the RPS Class 1. The sort of yellow kind of golden line is the old projections, but giving building owners that RPS Class 1 credits, and you will see those emissions are lower because we're using an average emissions factor with giving credit for the RPS. So there is some double counting of that renewable energy. The new projections are the blue line that you will see in the middle. Again, this calculation gives building owners credit for the RPS class 1, but without making any sort of double counting and using the most recently available data that we have. And I believe that should be all for this section. Oh, these are just next steps in the process. So as I explained in the beginning, a public comment period is open until July 15, and we will analyze all these public comments and the feedback that we got today from the board and make any revisions that are needed and presenting them to the APCC on July 30th. Next slide. That is just the timeline again. And then I think I'll stop for more Q&A from the board if needed.
Thank you. That was really helpful. Are there questions on the last several recommendations or comments? All right. It looks like Diana has also posted some information about the specific edits that we just went over. So seeing none, I think we can move on. We have about 5 minutes left, so let's see. I think we can get to the agenda. I hate to put Ziggy on the spot or Diana on the spot for our admin updates, but first we're gonna look at the meeting minutes from May 27th. Are there any questions or comments regarding the minutes themselves?
Do we have quorum still?
We do, yeah.
I move to accept the minutes as presented.
Right, and
I second it.
great. And so can we, on the motion of approving minutes, board members may vote in favor, oppose, or abstain if they did not attend the last meeting. Those in favor, please either say aye or raise your hands.
Aye.
All right, I think we have are there any abstentions? Are there any opposed?
Aye.
All right, board member Ellis, I did not see your vote.
I said aye.
Oh, okay, sorry. Oh,
no
okay.
worries.
I was looking for it rather than listening for it. Great. All right. So the minutes are approved, and I will give the last few minutes to Ziggy for administrative updates.
Great. I'll try to be quick. So first, we have received no new submissions for building portfolios. We only received resubmissions, so we're reviewing those for completeness at the point. And then since the Equitable Emission Investment Fund closed last month, we received 22 applications in total, and we are currently undergoing a legal review before sharing the submissions with the board. Also want to give a quick reporting update. 57% of BERDO IDs have submitted their data, and 13% have requested a reporting extension. So in total, about 70% of BERDO IDs have either submitted or engaged with the BERDO team at this point. And at an upcoming meeting in August, we'll hear from the reporting team with a more in-depth update. And then also the nomination period for the vacancy for Jack's old seat closed on June 13th, and we've received a total of 8 nominations, and the next step is to send those nominations to the mayor's office for review. And then also another update for seats on the board. We would like to share that today was Rashida Boyd's last day on the review board. We thank her for her service, and we will open a nomination process for her seat soon. And as a reminder, her seat was a CBO nominated seat. And also the BERDO team is planning an event to bring people together and groups working to cut building missions in Boston. And we're calling this BERDO Fest. That will provide a platform for connection, collaboration, and showcasing the new projects and early successes that are advancing in Boston towards a net zero future. More information will be sent out as soon as we finalize the details. And then finally, looking at our timeline, due to the lack of agenda items in July, we propose foregoing the July 14th and July 28th meeting as a summer recess, and then we will reconvene on August 11th for our next review board meeting, if anyone is opposed to this.
Great. So I want to just echo what Ziggy said and thank Rashida for her service to BERDO, and confirm that we'll be taking a July recess. And with that, it is 6:29. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Just a quick question, real quick.
Yeah.
Ziggy, of the 22 applications that were received for the Equitable Emissions Fund, how does that compare with round one in terms of numbers received?
We received 19 last year.
19. And then the same for the board nominations, 8 nominations sounds pretty high comparatively. Is that the case?
Yeah, because it's not this one was self-nominated, so a lot more people could
I
nominate
see.
someone. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. No other questions. Move to adjourn.
Second.
Wait a minute. So we are going to have a recess. We're all in agreement with that. We all don't have to vote on that, right?
Don't have to vote on it. No, but if you want to discuss, we can.
No, I just wanted to make sure
Okay.
that
Yeah.
because I noticed we voted for everything else, but we didn't vote for that. That's all. Sorry to interrupt.
No, totally fine. All right. So board member Lattimore made a motion to adjourn and board member Ellis seconded. So please, by show of hand or verbally, how do you vote in terms of adjourning? Thank you, board member Ellis.
Faber.
In favor.
All right. We have the ayes have it. We will adjourn at 6:30 p.m. Thank you all. Thanks for 2 really thorough presentations, and
Thank you.
see you in August.
Have a good one.
Thank
Bye.
you all.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.